the best thing you can do to relieve anxiety is what?
I would say do something for someone else.
Love that.
We should be so proud of those things where we failed. Like, what did I fail at? Write it down. And then right next to that, what did I learn from it? One of the things that worries me the most is when I meet couples and they tell me, oh, the other person's my best friend. I think, uh-oh.
I'm super excited for this episode because there's so much misinformation about happiness and what really drives it. And you are a board-certified psychiatrist, the gold standard for the science of happiness. And also you have a degree in positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania, which is how we know each other. And I'm wondering, what is the biggest piece of misinformation that is ricocheting around social media right now when it comes to happiness that actually doesn't deliver happiness?
So this is what, wakes me up at night. And it's that well-intended advice that happiness comes from within, that you need to work on yourself, discover yourself, feel your feelings, talk about them endlessly, that will help you figure out who you are. And this is distorted for many reasons. And I think every piece of evidence we have looking at research, over the past 50 years is the quality of our life really depends on the quality of our relationships. And you don't have good relationships, you work at having a good relationship, right? Like with your friends, with your family. Relationships are a verb that you are, actively contributing, you're engaging in them. And this idea that you have to work on yourself first before you do anything else, I think is taking us away from connection. And I've had patients who have gone to retreats and they've been not talking to anybody and trying to find themselves and discover themselves. And they are, involved in these very self-focused rituals. And it's really taking them away from, just those micro moments of connections with other people. And I think self-focus has hijacked a lot of these kind of avenues for happiness.
You, in your book, Everyday Vitality, which is phenomenal, you have this, you write about this stinging moment when you were with a patient. Do you remember that?
Oh my goodness. A little bit shameful. Yes, very well. I had gone to medical school, gone through psychiatry residency, and in the process had gotten really, really good at misery. And I understood, what made people miserable. And I was good at kind of dialing that down a little bit. Like I could turn the volume down a bit, make you a little less unhappy, maybe reduce the conflict.
So if people came in and complaining about how bad their life was, you wouldn't just say, "Oh, that's okay."
No, and I was like, okay, let's figure out ways to make this a little less bad. And so I had this patient one day, and she definitely didn't, qualify for. She wasn't checking the boxes to say that she had clinical depression, but she was not feeling great. Like it was a bit of that blah life that I think a lot of people can relate to. Like just things were not sparkly for her at all anymore. And she said, you know what, Dr. Boardman, all we ever do is talk about what's wrong with me. Like sometimes I'm even having a good day and then I'm thinking, what am I going to complain about? All we do is focus on the problems. And I was really taken aback because that's what I was trained to do. I was trained to focus on the problems, trained to focus on symptoms and signs and treatment and medication. But I had never really focused on what was right and what made life meaningful for her. What were her strengths? What did she feel strong about? And I ended up going back to school and studying applied positive psychology, where I heard words like resilience and optimism and post-traumatic growth. These are not words that psychiatrists hear in their training at all. And it really transformed how I think about mental health, that it's not just about the absence of illness or symptoms or signs.
We are both students of Marty Seligman, who rather brilliantly realized that most of the psychiatry industry was about making mentally unwell people better. And he had the epiphany, why not just make we're focused on making normal people happier. And you're at this perfect sort of crossroads. You're not only trained at making mentally ill people better, but you're also trained in making normal people even happier than they are. I think that's most of your focus. Is it one and the same, or are they two completely different pursuits?
I'm not sure how Marty would answer that question, but there is, I think, what we've done in the field of psychology and psychiatry is, I think, unintentionally made people who are having maybe like the normal like ups and downs of life, and we've pathologized it. We've decided that perfectly normal experiences are too stressful, that we can't handle them. And we've slapped names on these. We've said to people who are just experiencing anxiety that they have an anxiety disorder. We've told people who are a little bit sad that they have depression. And I think we're over pathologizing. And that's also leading to this over catastrophizing of perfectly normal experiences, maybe driven by a little bit this need for perfectionism that everyone says, I just want to be happy. I want to be happy all the time. And happiness is sort of a byproduct of a life well lived, right? It's doing things in service of, with your values, what's meaningful to you, social connection. And what we've removed, I think, from a lot of the conversations around mental health is a sense of agency. The idea that happiness is all in your head. No, it's in the actions you take.
Yes, you have control.
Absolutely. The connections you make and how you participate. So endlessly talking about what's wrong with you is probably not going to let you feel any better. And we have a word for that. It's called rumination. And when you ruminate, it comes from the Latin word ruminare, right? And that means like when a cow is chewing its cud and it is like regurgitating, you're going over and over and over with it. And we tend to ruminate when things go wrong a little bit. But when we co-ruminate with somebody else, it's almost like an invitation. And you might be doing that with a parent,
pity
with a friend.
party.
Absolutely. And here's the test for rumination. Like if you feel like you've had this conversation before with your friend or your therapist, whoever, then you're ruminating. If it's Groundhog Day, you're ruminating. And so that's why I think this assumption that always talking about it is helpful. You really have to be careful about how you talk about things, and if you're just saying the same thing over and over and over again. So like what I always invite patients to do is say, okay, what's your plan? What are you going to do about it? Like, what's the action you're going to take? And another really helpful way to think about that is, tell me about a time you were at your best. I think we're so focused right now on the past and past harm. And there's a lot of like grievance collecting and wound collecting, all the things that have gone wrong or where I've been wronged.
I think there's a multi-billion-dollar therapy industry out there that gets you focused on. Go back to your childhood and to look for that original wound that explains all your problems today. And is there value in that sort of exercise? Or
I mean, apologies to Freud, but no, I don't think so. It's just this idea of like the trauma plot is what I think we're seeing also in movies and on television. Like we have these shortcuts to explain like, oh, Logan Roy behaved this way because this bad thing happened to him. And that anybody's behavior can be sort of excused or explained by something that happened in the past. And what it's ignoring is agency. Like you are not who you were. You are like who you choose to be.
Oh, I love that line.
And so I think
who you choose to be.
That like kind of tapping into that agency and that sense of like action, like what are you going to do about it, is I think a much more helpful thing to do than just endlessly ruminating or co-ruminating with somebody about what's bothering you.
I think a cousin to that is this American obsession with winning. We remember the name of the athlete who won the gold medal, but who remembers the athlete who took fourth place or a bronze medal even? So, what's your attitude towards failure, and how can we turn failure into actually a useful tool?
Well, I think we've pathologized failure. Like we've decided is like culturally that it's unacceptable. And we certainly have kids in schools avoiding failure. Teachers aren't allowed to, write on papers with red ink
Oh,
because
really?
it might be triggering to the child to have any
Oh,
criticism.
or the sad face that was on all of my math assignments.
I had plenty of those too. And the notion of failure, I think we've engineered it out of life. It was a bit of everybody gets a trophy, but I'm a huge fan of failure. And I think what it does is it builds, this is where you're kind of building that resilience muscle, right? And that especially with kids, because we're seeing all these kids who are so terrified of failure and they're so perfect that they're afraid to try anything different. And I think as parents, we don't realize the pedestal that kids are putting us on. And there's some research out there that says it's like we should create a failure resume. We should be so proud of those things where we failed. We should talk about it openly, have a conversation, like even have a list of like, what did I fail at? Write it down. And then right next to that, what did I learn from this?
I love that. I've been on this podcast, I love to give people takeaways. So the idea of a failure resume, I just want to put a point on that. This idea is you actually keep track of your failures, but then think about it to see, well, what I learned from. I think it's almost a cliche. We don't really learn much from our successes.
Yeah.
And often our successes are a function of luck as much as they are anything we necessarily did. But failure being a teacher and making sure that we pay attention to that teacher.
And somebody I had met had said that her father used to ask her years ago when she would come home from school, what did you fail at today? And, it's so the opposite of like, oh, what went well? And, that kind of more rosy rainbows and unicorns conversation, because her father's idea was if you're not failing, you're not trying. And so I think when you embed that kind of failure and you talk about it, of all those times you messed up royally, and professionally and personally, and just share that and you make it part of the conversation, I think it's a lot easier than to sort of normalize it. And even in math class, in history class, or just for all of us as adults, just do stuff that kind of you're not just trying to excel at and be perfect at. I've got a new hobby now. I ride horses and I'm super mediocre at it. And I'm fine with that. Like there's something really liberating about not
so
just
falling on your
telling.
rump could actually be developmental.
Exactly, at my age, yes.
I'm sort of connecting the dots here. I wrote a book for National Geographic called The Blue Zones of Happiness, where we found the statistically happiest places in the world. And at the time, Denmark was on the very top. We went to the happiest city in Denmark, a place called Aarhus. And I discovered this notion that is pervasive there, they call Jantelov, which essentially says it's an unspoken rule that you're no better than anybody else. So don't come to the dinner table and tell me about how great you are or your accomplishment today, because you're going to be frowned upon. So what you get is this society of humble people where nobody brags too much. And I think a byproduct is this society where people kind of look after each other. They're not trying to get ahead, like the sort of self-actualization of America right now, that we honor the best. It's not about how far you march ahead of everybody else, but rather how well you march with everybody else. And I'm getting an undertone of that in this notion of learning from failure and actually celebrating the failure as opposed to the success.
And I think that point you make about humility is so critical, and we've lost a lot of that, right? And I think it might also have to do something with like a sort of lack of curiosity. And maybe a version of what you're saying at the dinner table would, a friend of mine from the South would say, you had to ask questions. You were never allowed to talk about yourself. And everybody knows something you don't. There's no such thing as a boring person. And I think when you switch your mindset, that if I'm not connecting here, what am I not asking? Like, what is there some question here that could draw at something that they're an expert in, that they're passionate about, that I could connect with them in some meaningful way?
You hit on a very important point there. I think if you can draw out of people what they're passionate about and get them talking about that, they're going to like you.
Mm-hmm.
People like to talk about themselves, but when you ask them enough questions so that you identify their passion and you dig down a little bit, you unleash, I think, this love, almost this wellspring of likability.
Yeah, and you get to learn something too, because I bet,
Yes,
if you go
yes.
into every interaction thinking everybody knows something I don't, what can I learn from this person? Because they definitely have something to teach you. And I always find with myself, like it's a failure of mine and genuinely a failure if I cannot find something that we can connect on. And there's this phenomenon in psychology called the correspondence effect that we judge ourselves by our intentions. If I cut you off in traffic, it's because I'm late, and I need to get somewhere. But if someone cuts me off, they're a jerk. And so we judge other people by their actions and ourselves by our thoughts. And I think once you start to sort of
Interesting.
take a step back and realize, like, how am I judging this person in some way? Like, am I not giving them the benefit of the doubt? Am I not asking them a question that could unlock that spark, and that we could then really have this connection. And maybe we disagree politically, or maybe we have different points of view, but I bet there's some common ground here. And you enter interactions with humility and curiosity and that intention of giving them the benefit of the doubt. And imagine reminding yourself people aren't just what they do. Sometimes it is what's going on in their head and we have no idea about it.
When I've studied the world's longest lived communities in blue zones, one of the values that keeps coming up is generosity. People who give, who feel connected, who show up for one another every day, tend to live longer, healthier lives. That's why I appreciate what Thrivent stands for. Thrivent is a financial services company that believes money is a tool, not a goal. And that idea really resonates with me. Because when money reflects your values, it can support a life of purpose, not just a bigger bank account. Thrivent offers advice, investments, insurance, banking, and also generosity programs because Thrivent believes deeply in generosity and in empowering people to be generous in their own communities. And I know that when generosity is woven into daily life, it builds stronger social bonds and leads to better health outcomes. Thrivent has over 120 years of expertise, and they've been a Fortune 500 company for over 30 years. Through their generosity programs, they have helped clients mobilize 17 million volunteer hours in 2025 alone. To me, that's values actually showing up and generosity in action. Learn more about this unique combination of financial services and generosity programs at Thrivent.com. Over the past 2 decades, I've explored the happiest and longest lived places around the world, writing my books about blue zones, and every single one of those books requires me to travel. One of those books, called The Blue Zone American Kitchen, required me to actually travel, do research, and cook. That's why I list my space on Airbnb. It doesn't involve turning my life upside down, but rather it's a smart, practical way to make use of my space while I'm away rather than letting it sit empty. And at the same time, I make a little money. Indeed, your home might be worth more than you think. Find out how much at airbnb.com/host. I've had the privilege of attending many great dinner parties with you, and you are so graceful. And I wonder if this comes naturally or you've learned it along the way, but I'm wondering if you could share with the rest of us your secret to a good conversation. Because I think we kind of lose that in this world where we're connected by phones. We don't exercise that muscle, that face to face, the person you're sitting next to at dinner who you might not know. What's the secret of conducting a good conversation?
Don't you think it's that like active listening piece? It's not just quietly listening, but it's actually like digging in and asking questions. I was in a taxi recently and the taxi driver, like I was about to go into like my Duolingo because I'm on a streak and I was about to sort of do more of that. And I was in the Bahamas and it was this long taxi ride. And I decided, like, you know what, wait, I'd love to talk to this guy.
Oh, I love this.
And we had the most incredible conversation. I got a full tour of of Nassau. He showed me where the hospital was, where the president lives, where the ambassador lives, and the full history of this country. It was to the point that I was sad that the car ride was over. And we had this lovely conversation. I learned so much from him. And it sort of brought me back to like that time where you used to, in those in-between moments,
Yeah.
you used to talk to people.
That's right.
And we've just forgotten. And it's so easy to put your phone away.
Increasingly, I think nobody talks to their Uber driver.
Nobody.
You get in and you go on your phone, and it's this wonderful opportunity for a human interaction to learn something and to exercise that conversation muscle. And we forget it. We lose it.
We've entirely lost it. And I know hairdressers feel this way, manicure, but people you used to spend
Not my
time with,
hairdresser.
but maybe there wasn't a whole lot of time you spent there.
I'm
But
kidding.
that you would connect and have a conversation. And, there is some research too that just having a good conversation it really is protective of your mental health with people you love. And that's not in a text message. And it's fine over the phone, but that those face-to-face interactions. And we also know that, especially for anyone, your listeners who have kids, sometimes it's not face-to-face, it's driving, it's walking, it's those side-by-side conversations too, that's where just those little doors open up and you can have these sort of connections that are unexpected. And I think it is part of listening and not immediately jumping into, let me tell you about the time that happened to me. And that's where you hijack the conversation. And again, it's like the opposite of humility and you make it all about you.
In your book, Everyday Vitality, you talk about an exercise you actually do with your own family, which I love, which is the rose and thorn. Can you...
I'm actually very anti-rose and thorns, I think.
Oh, really?
Because you know why? Because it really, like my kids, I used to try to do that. And I'd read that Michelle Obama used to do this with her kids and the Obamas would sit around the table at dinner and do this. And the idea being like, tell me about like the highlight of your day and then tell me what was the thorn. And my kids used to just roll their eyes and they'd be like, the worst part of my day is you asking me this question, like that's the thorn. And so I realized that these were just invitations to talk about themselves. And
What's a better way to do it?
I thought, ask each other questions. Ask each other questions. Let's talk about what's going on in the world.
So you got to think about them and what their day might have been like rather than a programmatic.
And it just became so formulaic, and I felt like it kind of had lost the meaning in that sort of conversation. It was better to kind of have them talk to each other about it, have us ask each other questions rather than the roses and thorns thing that actually kind of fell flat. And it was just an invitation to talk about me.
But, I almost think people need these sort of rote exercises. I have 3 wonderful kids, and we'll sit at the table, and I'll ask. Let's have some questions, and it's like yanking teeth. They don't, without the instructions, they don't necessarily intuit it, and I think that's a problem with a lot of young people these days because they're getting most of their interactions on their phone. Mm-hmm. Rather than, okay, now you're in front of real people and not every interaction is going to necessarily deliver a dopamine hit.
One of the questions though that I think can be like kind of just open people up is, if somebody is having an issue, like what advice would you give them? Because this is called self-distancing, and it's what we study in psychology and psychiatry is if I go to you and say, hey, Dan, I've got this problem and I'm thinking this, that, or the other, and I can just sit and ruminate with you about what's going on with me. But you could say, what would you tell a friend who was having that same issue? And immediately it becomes, I'd tell a friend, I get some clarity when I'm not thinking about myself here. I get some clarity in it. And that immediately is like a conversation opener. I think it helps you tap into your strengths. Oh, well, maybe I learned something from somebody in the past. Here's maybe what they could do. Here's a way to think about it. Another question you could ask is, what would your future self think about this? Like, how would that look? How would a fly on the wall describe this? Because going back to this idea that I think these mental health conversations are so fixated on the individual and the interior world of theirs, it's actually when you lift out of yourself that you actually can find that the clouds part a little bit. What would you tell a friend? What would your future self think? What would a fly on the wall think? And you you actually think about something in a much clearer way. And I think that's also tapping into like our altruism. We're good at caring about others. And almost we've been told we have to focus on ourselves first before we can help anybody else. I entirely disagree. One of the most effective ways to deal with your anxiety or your stress, do something for someone else.
I agree 100%. In Minnesota, we have this, a Norwegian Buddhist, and he has this line that we all have 99 problems. There's a bill we need to pay. The tire's low on air. I'm developing a new wrinkle. We all have 99 problems. If you list them out, you can spend all your effort getting rid of the top 10 problems. And by the time you solve those top 10 problems, there could be 10 new problems at the bottom. So rather, he says, than focusing on your 99 problems, you shift the focus to somebody else's problems. And those 99 problems shrink in size in your mind. They become smaller and smaller the more you're focusing your efforts on somebody else. And I think, we've kind of lost that. You've read Robert Putnam's book, Bowling Alone, which is such a great book. And it tracks how we've lost social connections since the 1960s, largely because of suburbs and because of screens.
Yeah.
And the membership in like Lions clubs and Rotary clubs and bowling clubs have all diminished. And when you go to, I think the core of all happiness research, the best thing you can do to increase your own happiness is focus on your social relationships. And we're losing those. We've gone from 3 good friends to fewer than 2 good friends. And I think what the very first step is to give people ways to reconnect with others, which leads to my next question. And you write about this too. How do you connect with people? How do you make new friendships at middle age? Well, and it's not necessarily even a middle age. How does an 18-year-old do it? Or you're over 30 now, right? So if you're over 30, what advice do you give people for connecting at in this age of?
And life gets so busy that sort of friendship is something that falls by the wayside, that people don't think of it as a priority, that it's not something that they have time for, especially men who, lose that. Yeah. And women do as well. But it's why I think it has to be at the top of your priority list. And there may be friends over time who you don't have as much in common with, or they've moved away, but you can't make new old friends, I always think.
Oh, yeah.
And that there is something that wonderful, when you come together again, like speak to them for a couple of months, but then it's just so easy and that connection is so delightful. But one of the things that worries me the most is when I meet couples and they tell me, oh, the other person's my best friend.
Oh, yes.
And I think, I'm worried about this. Because you need good friends, and good friends make your romantic relationship better as well. And
this is a big insight, I think.
It's really worrisome to me. And I see it increasingly in young people because our lives have shrunk so much, and you can spend an entire day or weekend really not interacting with anybody. And especially if you're in a couple that maybe you order in, you watch Netflix, you chill out, whatever it is, like you really can minimize your interactions with anybody. And to make sure you're maintaining, but also building new relationships. Caroline Weber is a new friend of mine, probably 15 years now old, but I'm so delighted. But, it came to that moment of like, can we have a first date? Like, can we go out and have coffee and making that initial effort? Because it is effort. And we've told ourselves that we should live in this frictionless world. And friendship matters.
I want to put a placeholder because you told this great story about how meeting Caroline Weber, who's this great author who wrote What Marie Antoinette Wore to the Revolution. She's a great writer. You met her. You each, I don't know what the female version of a bromance was, but you immediately followed up with an email and said, is it too early to have our first date? And that's such a great sort of prescription, or a positive prescription to borrow a term, that when you meet somebody you like, follow up and suggest a meeting in real life. Don't just sit there and type emails or text each other. Let's go have coffee, or let's take a walk together. And it just seems so kind of mundane Nobody makes any money at that interaction, so you don't hear it marketed to you. But it's so powerful, and it's the core of not only human connection, it's the core of happiness.
Yeah.
And I think you'll agree with me on that.
100%. And as you said, like it's not transactional. Like it's purely for the joy of doing it. And our calendars are full of meetings and transactional situations, but
Yeah.
what we're not doing is just having regular calendar meetings. So I actually walk one morning a week regularly with one friend of mine because I know if it's not there, I'm not going to be able to see her. And having, I think scheduling even monthly or every 6 weeks or 8 weeks, just having it on the calendar that I'm going to go see a Broadway show with a friend of mine every 8 weeks. It's something we're going to do together and it's going to happen. And it's as important to me as a doctor's appointment, as important to me as teaching, seeing patients. Like this is a priority and kind of
Yes.
putting it front and center.
Yes, and it's calendared, and you don't cancel that appointment. Before we leave the relationship issue, though, I think it shocks people to hear that you're alarmed if somebody says, "Oh, my partner's my best friend." Does it alarm you because you worry they don't have other friends, or should you indeed find a best friend elsewhere outside of your relationship?
Both. I worry that you don't have the support system of other friends because there's a lot of evidence that when there is conflict in your romantic relationship, having good friends can help you navigate that.
Yes.
And so it's really essential to work on those relationships and not just drop, your friends when you fall in love, and as wonderful as that can be, like that your friends will make your relationship, your romantic relationship better in every way, and be that voice of reason when you're frustrated or there's a conflict, whatever that is, they'll be there for you. And so making that a priority and cultivating relationships. And yes, it's great to have friends who are, that you share friends, but it's also nice to have your own friends, that there's stuff you do with your friends and they do with their friends. And as I say, like relationships are a verb and you really have to work at them. And I think even more you need to work at your friendships when you're when you're married or in a relationship.
Yes. I love this. There's so many counterintuitive gems. You've told us that failure is much better than success, at least at learning. You're telling us that your partner should maybe not be your best friend, and you're saying that you shouldn't go to your therapist and whine about your life, but you should switch the vocabulary to saying why my life is great. And it's so counterculture, I think. And
Well, I think there's so many messages in psychology and psychiatry that are really distorting the way we're thinking about mental health. And another one would be that you really do need to be happy all the time. There is so much to be learned from stress and negative emotions and anxiety. These are data points. Like, what are they telling you? Do you need to shift your behavior in some way? And I think we've started thinking about our emotional lives in a very all or nothing way. I'm happy or I'm sad. I'm calm or I'm anxious. And we're sort of ignoring this nuance of emo-diversity, right? This idea that like I can be happy about something, but also frustrated and sad about other stuff. I can be anxious about something, but also grateful for others. That we can have emotions that coexist, multiple emotions. And it's not just in this very narrow either or like way of thinking about it.
what are some of the other big myths about happiness that we miss?
I think this notion that all stress is bad is completely distorted. This idea that talking about it is helpful, not always. This idea that happiness comes from within, happiness comes from with. That you need to work on your weaknesses all the time when I think you should tap into your strengths. I think there's also a misconception about your past defines you. I think your actions and your future will. So that's really what I'm interested in kind of tackling because I think this misinformation is making people feel worse about their mental health and that they think that any curveball is going to be permanently devastating. And what we've forgotten about here is we are resilient. It's our birthright to be resilient. It's something that we have within us. And I think that we're being told that this is something you're either really lucky or you have to work on all the time. But I think these conversations around mental health are undermining our mental health.
There's this great line by Isabel Allende. She's talking to an audience. She says, "You Americans are deluded with this idea that you all deserve the pursuit of happiness. What you deserve is to suffer and learn from it."
Oh, I love that.
And
Yes.
it's kind of perfect. You don't learn a hell of a lot from happiness, but when life throws you a curveball, now there's your opportunity.
Yeah, I love that.
You said this happiness does not come from within, and I totally agree with that. My whole sort of blue zone thesis is that longevity and happiness come from without. And what I mean by that is that I argue that most of our happiness comes from our environment. And even though I think there's a lot of positive psychology techniques that work, journaling and practicing gratitude and savoring and so forth, I think of them a lot like a healthy diet. We start them with great intentions, but after about 2 or 3 months, we forget, or we get busy, or we run out of discipline to do it. And we know that if you follow unhappy people from places like Moldavia to Denmark, or unhappy places in Africa or Southeast Asia to Canada, which is both Denmark and Canada are very happy places. Within 1 year, these people don't change their gender. They don't change their psychological makeup. They don't change their education level much. They don't usually change their religion or their sexual orientation. Almost nothing changes about them. But in 1 year, they report often a doubling of their happiness. They report the happiness level of their adoptive home. And I don't know any positive psychology technique that can occasion a doubling of your happiness in 1 year.
Wow.
But maybe you'll tell me one.
Well, I think there is this sort of illusion of self-sufficiency. Like I can do everything by myself. I don't need anyone to help me. And I think that's one of the other myths right now, the sort of cultural sort of pressures that I can do it on my own. But this idea of how our situations can shift how we feel, and even in the most minute way, that if I receive a distressing email and I'm upset or something's bothering me, just the physical act of getting up from my chair, opening the door, looking out the window, just that physical act of even changing rooms. And again, like I think this idea that, is wrong is that like our thoughts define who we are. I think our behaviors do for ourselves. And it's called behavior activation, which is part of psychology, is, the actions that you take can really shape how you feel. So it might even be, it's very blue zones, like going outside, taking a walk. We all have nature deficit disorder. Changing your situation in a small way. I'm not talking about moving to Denmark, and that might not be available for everybody, or moving to Canada. But these small ways that you can change your situation and create opportunities to feel better. And it might just be putting the sneakers by the door before you go outside.
Yes.
I mean, this is all very blue zones, but make it easier to do the behaviors you want to engage in and a little harder to do those that you don't.
That's exactly right. I actually more radical when I think about, or when I suggest people changing their environments or shaping their surroundings. First of all, you think, well, I can't move to Denmark. But I looked this up. The average adult moves 11 times in their adult life. That's 11 opportunities to move from less happy places to happy places. What's a happy place? You're way more likely to be happy if you live in a walkable neighborhood. There's plenty of research on that. You're more likely to be happy if you're close to nature, if you have access to nature or parks. You're more likely to be happy if you live on a street with trees on them. You're more likely to be happy if you live in a place where you have easy access to healthy food. These are all very conscious decisions. And you decide to yourself, what's most important to my family? And if health and happiness is most important, you do very well to strategically pick your next move. So it's a place that has these known features that will unconsciously nudge you into doing the healthy thing every day, all day long. And, while I love the field of positive psychology, I just question its lasting power. Similarly, I'm a big fan of curating your social circle. In Okinawa, we call that a moai. And a lot of us, just with inertia, we keep the old friends we had from high school or whatever, or college, or from work. And I think most of us, if we do internal inventory, that we've had the same friends for 10 years. And while I would never tell you to dump your unhappy and unhealthy friends, I will tell you, and we're mutual friends with Nicholas Christakis, who's shown that what our friends do is measurably contagious. If our friends sit around and eat junk food, guess what we do when we're with them? If our friends sit around and bitch, or our friends are lonely or unhappy, measurably contagious. So not necessarily dump them, because they probably need a Samantha Boardman in their life to make them happier and healthier, but to proactively add a healthy or happy friend to that social network, to be that person that you met at a dinner party, to be the one that sends them an email right away. Is it too early to have our first date? That's the kind of stuff, curating that. And friends are lasting. That social environment is something you can set up, and it lasts for years or decades, and it will have measurable influence on your happiness.
Well, it's sort of like seek out people who elevate you, and I think can engage you. And it was Aristotle who said there are three types of friendships. That there was the kind where, I do this for you, you do that for me, was one kind. And the second kind was
transactional, I guess.
Totally transactional, kind of the give and take. And then the other one was like we have fun together. Like we like hanging out together and doing stuff. It's just fun. But the third type really was elevating. And it was that like, I believe in your goodness and you believe in mine. And the kind of the one that like sees your potential and is there for you in dark times, but also there is a tailwind during the good times, who sees opportunities for you, who helps you take them and sort of sees this elevation quality. And I think to seek out that type. The transactional ones, the fun ones, fine. But I think the third type is the most sacred. And I think when we have core friends like that in our lives, and that is the secret sauce of well-being, right? And especially if you live nearby one, or you can, they are down the block or within a walking distance, you can walk with them. There's nothing better.
What do you call that third class? That
I think you just call them, I think the kind that makes you want to be a better person. I'm sure there's a better word for that. But like that sort of elevation friendship.
That's the kind of friend you are, Samantha.
Oh, you are certainly that to me.
I think the key to happiness is everybody befriend Samantha Boardman. Or if you can't get to New York, Everyday Vitality is available on Amazon. Or Positive Prescription, which is your great newsletter, by the way. I encourage people to get the paid version. But I want to talk about an article that just came out, and that is a study done on solutions to relationships, relationship advices on Reddit. And I guess I'll let you talk about this very interesting revelation, which seems to be the most common advice when a relationship isn't going well.
Well, thank you for reading my Substack. I'm so touched that you read it, and just, breaking news as well. So this was a study that was done looking at 15 years of advice on Reddit, and just what kind of, on these advice forums about relationships, people in most like friendships, romantic ones, coworkers, seeking advice from fellow Reddit users. And what's fascinating is over the course of 15 years, there's been this uptick in just this bottom line of saying, leave, get rid of them, set boundaries, move on, dump them, it's over. And that has really been trending up. And what has been declining at the same time, not surprisingly, is any advice to communicate, talk to them, be patient, give them some grace. That's evaporating. And then at the same time, not surprisingly, is the advice, maybe you need a therapist. Maybe you need to talk to somebody. And that goes into this kind of psychiatry, psychology, industrial complex, this idea that talking to a professional is going to make things better. And I can
bitch
tell
about
you,
the relationship
it
and
is
then dump
not.
them.
I can tell you a story. Years ago, I met this man who had survived the Twin Towers, and he was there in the elevator when the second plane hit. And this fuel bomb ravaged him in the elevator. And he gets out, it opens at the sky lobby, and this is sort of the last thing he remembers is walking through there, people staring at him, and he's burned all over his body. Somehow he makes it down the stairs, gets in an ambulance, ends up at New York Hospital, and a nurse takes the ring off his finger. And that's the last thing he remembers. He's in a coma. They put him in a medically induced coma for 2 months. And he's in the burn unit. It's end of November when he wakes up. He's lost friends. He has no idea what's happened to the world, though. And this very well-meaning psychiatrist comes by and says, I think you might be a little depressed. Do you need some medication? Do you want to talk about it? And he said, if there are any psychiatrists in the room, and I literally want to dive under my chair, let me tell you something. Sometimes people go through hell and they don't need to talk to strangers and they don't need to take medication. They need their friends, they need their family, they need their loved ones to support them. But with all due respect, I mean, he used 4-letter word, off. And it was this really powerful moment because just sort of it tackled what I thought that talking is always helpful. There's actually lots of research that not talking can be more helpful for people, or talking to your friends and family when you feel like it, not in a formal way. Also, this idea of debriefing after a trauma happens, the idea of going around a room and everyone talking about their trauma can actually further traumatize people. So that's been completely debunked.
Wow.
And I think this idea that actually sometimes your friends might be better than your therapist, that we've forgotten. We used to turn, it goes back to bowling alone, like we used to turn to our neighbors, our family, our friends. They were our confidants. Like that's where we felt comfortable. Now we're told that a stranger doesn't really know us, who's only going to hear a certain slice of this story, is better. And with all due respect, I think there's some not so great therapists out there who are just inviting people to talk about themselves.
Yeah, and they fuel it. And
they're inviting this
pick up on
venting.
that wound when you were 5 years old on our next session.
And this new research that just came out that I was fascinated by because it was sort of validating what I was concerned about is asking somebody to talk about their parents today can really distort their memories of them. And especially if you're having a bad day and, we're invited to talk about your past and what your mother was like, it might really color how you felt about her in the moment today. And so the idea that talking about our past is going to set us free is a conceit that I don't think is true. And this fixation on, rehashing and diving into, and this Freudian idea of let's talk about what happened to you is actually making a lot of people feel worse.
I want to pick up on 2 points here. This point about therapists and talking about negativity, especially in reference to our parents. But before we started talking about relationships and how now the common advice is pull the ripcord.
Yeah.
What advice do you give to couples who are having a tough time?
Obviously taking off the table, there are sometimes some truly toxic relationships that one should leave. And we're not talking about that. But this idea of what can I learn from this? What is this person actually trying to tell me? This idea that what I'm taking is criticism is actually a way to open a door into a conversation. That I'm feeling judged, but maybe this is somebody asking me a question that they're unable to articulate.
And maybe it is my fault after all.
Yes, and there's so much finger pointing, I think, these days. And we're told it's never about me. It's always somebody else doing this. It's other people who are these irritants. And that I think we do have to look at ourselves sometimes, what role am I playing in this? How am I not having this person feel heard?
There's a great mnemonic device. Every time I point a finger at somebody else, there's 3 more fingers pointing back at me.
but we've lost sight of that. And I think even sometimes people come to therapy individually and they're just there to complain and they want that validation. And what, then use ChatGPT as your therapist. Because there's sometimes I think people don't want to be challenged and to look back at wait, what role am I playing in this?
Yes. All right. So now I want to come back to this therapist sort of modus operandi, which is to get you talking about your problems. And especially with parents. I went to therapy for a while, and therapist was literally trying to do that, trying to get me go back and see where I was wounded as a child. And they kept pushing me. And I go, wait a minute, my parents are great. In fact, I had them on this podcast, Roger and Dolly Buettner, and they're fantastic. They're still alive, and they're my greatest source of joy. When I look back, yes, we were poor and they were tough on me, but I think that made me a more resilient adult and a more appreciative adult. I'm not perfect, believe it or not, but I'd credit them with most of the good qualities I have. But you look at this recent research and the number of young women who report anxiety has tripled since 2000, in the last 25 years. And the number of people who say, I'm not too happy, has doubled. How do you explain that, number one? And number two, what can we do about it?
Couple things. I think the number of people saying they have anxiety has to do a little bit with what's called the inflation prevalence hypothesis. And this idea that
inflation prevalence hypothesis, I'm going to double score that.
That in talking about mental health and kind of destigmatizing it and educating people in the language of mental health, and people are so fluent today in mental health that they just throw words around. They'll say, I'm anxious, I have an anxiety disorder. And people come to my office now with that saying, I have an anxiety disorder. And it's clear to me they don't. They have a reason to be anxious about something that's going on in their lives, but it's shifted their identity. They've incorporated this into their backpack of who they are. And so because they feel that they have an anxiety disorder, it's changed their self-concept. They don't want to meet friends for a drink. They'll say no to an opportunity. They might, be asked to have an interview somewhere and they'll say, well, I need to protect my anxiety disorder. They're over-identifying with a fleeting emotion. They're letting something define them that is there, and they're feeling it, but they're letting it become and subsume them. And this notion of, I need to protect my mental health over this, and it's creating so much avoidance. And avoidance is such a recipe for unhappiness because it's avoiding those challenges, those opportunities, those social connections that I think are really slowly chipping away and eroding our happiness. And so I think that's a big contributor to this this uptick in anxiety and what we're seeing in people who are less happy. But also with women, I think we can't help but talk about screens with that, the self-comparison that kicks in when one's online and thinking, well, that's this person's perfect life and not mine. I think it takes 17 seconds for a young woman to feel badly about herself when she is looking scrolling through Instagram. Like, I don't have that, but I wish I had that life, and it's just the self-comparison piece. Self-comparison isn't always bad. It might, if you're a runner, you're going to probably, if you're racing against someone, you're going to try harder if it's against somebody else, or if you're trying to if you're trying to compete in a way, self-comparison can be wonderful for you. It's just, I think, in a way where you're competing with such impossible standards, it's making people, especially young women, deeply unhappy. And we're seeing an uptick in self-injurious behavior and things like that.
So if you had to generate the 141 character tweet on this.
I'm too long-winded.
The best thing you can do to relieve anxiety is what?
I'd say do something for someone else.
Love that. I'm writing a book now on the parts of the world where people live the longest lives in full health. It's called the Blue Zone's Evolution. And one of these places is in Norway. And in Norway, the healthcare system is set up so that you can choose a doctor for the long run. And you can sort of date lots of doctors till you find the right one and then keep that doctor for decades. And research shows that if you keep the same doctor for decades, you actually get better outcomes. You're more likely to take his or her advice. You're more likely to follow through. The doctor's more likely to know you and make better prescriptions, et cetera. But in this area of Norway, if you show up with signs of depression, the doctor is not going to refer you to a specialist. The doctor is not going to give you a prescription for Prozac. The doctor is going to set up a meeting with a volunteer coordinator. And the volunteer coordinator is going to sit down with you to find out what your passions are, what your values are, and then they're going to get you doing something called dugna. And dugna in Norwegian is group volunteering. And if you look at the depression levels and the anxiety of Norway, it is much lower than the United States. So I can't say with 100% certainty that Dugna is better than Prozac, but I'll bet it is.
Oh, wow. I'll bet it is. And if you look at like Isaac Pilotensky's research on mattering and what that means, he said, of course, we all want to feel that we are valued. But the other point, like the other piece of mattering is feeling that you're adding value. And I think we've gotten so focused on the feeling valued part of mattering and that we've forgotten about the joy of adding value to somebody else's life. And that's what you're talking about. Duna?
Dugna.
Dugna. I love that.
Yeah, and it's group volunteer. It's not. It's not. I go by myself. It's I join a group of people and we go clean up a park or we go sing.
So you've got the double benefit of doing this shared activity that you're doing with others, and you're doing it, for somebody else, and you're making a difference in the world. It reminds me of those, New Year's resolution studies. Is when people make, I'm going to make an individual change, and I'm going to stop smoking, I'm going to eat less, I'm going to go to the gym, versus I'm going to go for a walk with a friend every week. I'm going to engage in something that's fun, but that's social. I'm going to play pickleball. I'm going to do something that involves another person. You're much more likely to stick to it 3 months later, 6 months later, 9 months later, and you're going to have more fun along the way. And I think those kind of pro-social activities, but when you get the double whammy, when you're doing something for somebody or it's something, some higher sort of, power, and then you're also doing it with someone else, that's perfect.
Our mutual friend, John Hobbick, when he was the editor of the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, he oversaw the social calendar, which included concert and sporting events, but he also added giving back and actually listed these things that you could get involved with as a group. And he said it was a fantastic success. Of course, it's gone by the wayside now, but I think it's such a brilliant idea.
Love that. And, and we know with teenagers is when they give advice to other teenagers having a hard time, it helps the other teenagers, but it also helps them.
Oh, yeah.
So I think we've forgotten that kind of peer-to-peer kind of connection rather than like maybe you don't need that professional.
I love the idea of a 13-year-old. When I was in 4th grade, I learned.
Well, it's so interesting. They had middle schoolers giving advice to younger students.
And I'll bet they listened.
They listened, and apparently they were much more likely to listen to that advice than technically better advice coming from a teacher or a parent who's giving objectively better advice on study habits and when to do your homework. So the younger kids absorb this information coming from a, older peer. But then also the ones who were giving the advice givers were also much more likely to stick to the advice that they were giving. Because you sort of want to do like as you're saying, and so that they were much more, their study habits improved as well. And so I think when we become givers again, we feel better and we're actually much more likely to take positive actions that are in sync with our values.
So I think we both agree that giving back or this group volunteering is the best first line of prescription for people with anxiety or depression. But I mean, you're a board certified physician. You can prescribe drugs. When do you prescribe? When is it right to prescribe drugs for people? So people listening right now, what is the trigger that says, okay, I've read Everyday Vitality, I read the positive prescription, I've looked at all the best advice on positive psychology, I'm still not getting over this. When do you turn to drugs, and what drugs really work these days?
I think one has to be very careful about that question. And if you look at the DSM, that's our
what's
Bible,
the DSM?
The Bible of Psychiatry, this diagnostic manual of psychiatry, that you look and you can see what sort of, there's a checklist. You can look at it online. I have it in the book of what, if you qualify for a clinical diagnosis of depression. And it's not just feeling a little bit down. There's many more sort of factors that contribute to that. And that might mean that you are a candidate for an antidepressant. But that said, if you're not also including some lifestyle changes in the person's, in their everyday existence, asking questions like, how much are you sleeping? What are you eating? What is when do you socialize? Like getting a full picture of who this person is and that you're seeing a psychiatrist who's asking you those bigger questions. And the one thing I was taught in medical school how to do was put people on medication. I was never taught how to take them off.
Interesting.
And so you learn how to put people on medicine. You really don't learn how to take them off of medication. And so when people go off of medication, either they run out of their prescription or they forget, whatever that is, sometimes they feel quite badly. And they're assuming that that's their depression or anxiety coming back, but it can be, in fact, the withdrawal effects of the medication. So I think only now is my profession sort of waking up to this reality. And some people can taper off medications, no problem, but some people have a really hard time when they've been on them for a really long time. And so I'm very careful about when I put people on medication. It's not just something that you just prescribe and you're on it for the rest of your life. This is not giving insulin to a diabetic. And I used to ask people, and this is how I was trained, who were resistant to take medication, if you had diabetes, would you take insulin? And of course, because I would make this equivalence, like this idea that it's the exact same thing as a physical problem. And I was wrong entirely with that. And I think, and I've seen medication work tremendously. I've seen it save lives. But I've also seen it make people pretty miserable and have horrible side effects from it and have a really hard time getting off of it. So I think you really need to be attentive to it, not see it as a life sentence if you're going to do it, and also be doing things that could help you feel better. And maybe you need medication to kind of give you that boost, and that maybe then you'll start exercising. There was a study done at Duke several years ago where they asked people to take an antidepressant, another group of people who had mild symptoms of depression. The other group of people were asked to walk on a treadmill, not even outside, for 30 minutes, 3 or 4 days a week. Both groups got better, but 9 months later, the treadmill group still felt better, whereas the medication group was back to feeling worse again. So I think we forget how valuable a lot of the blue zones activities are actually integral to our mental health. It's movement, it's being outside, it's eating well, it's sleeping well, and it's socializing. All those sort of seemingly external, experiences that kind of seem by the way in a clinical world. Oh, I had this problem, give me a pill and I'll take it. I can't sleep, I need a medication. I'm feeling a little bit down, I need a medication. I think that this kind of quick fix, it's not just the medical world that's kind of created this. I think we also have a very, people who just want that quick fix as well. But if you're willing to, I think, speak to a really good psychiatrist who does have the experience and can say, like, this isn't a long-term thing. Let's revisit this. Let's see how you feel. And if this is helping you or not. And that the side effects, I just want to make sure that the side effects are not actually making you feel even worse.
So probably a third of the people or so listening to this have suffered depression, right? Or are depressed.
For sure.
So if I come in and see you and say, Dr. Boardman, I've been feeling blue, and you check me out and you see I'm clinically depressed, what's going to be your algorithm? What are the steps you're going to take to try to treat me? What's the first line, second line, third line?
It's so individual. So I don't have an algorithm per se. I want to know all about Dan Buettner. Then I want to know, but I would want to know your habits and your lifestyle and that whole piece of your puzzle before I just say, here's a pill, I'll see you in 6 months. I really would want to know kind of what's going on with you and what are you doing actively to kind of protect and promote your mental health. Because I was really good at this kind of idea of pathogenesis, which is the study of disease and the treatment of disease, but not salutogenesis, which is the creation of health. And I would want to focus on the salutogenesis piece. And to me, that would be as important as any pill I give you. And I would prescribe being outdoors. I would prescribe exercise. I would prescribe healthy eating, and make sure my patient's taking that as seriously as maybe the pill I would be prescribing.
So you would literally ask them to do this before you gave them a pill?
I think it would depend on the severity of the situation
Okay.
and the individual and how they were feeling.
There was this huge book 20 years ago called Prozac Nation, which I think
remember.
woke Americans up to serotonin uptake inhibitors. Is that the class of drugs that are most commonly used these days for depression?
There's other families of drugs as well. Some of them are better tolerated, but it's still not perfect, and it's really imperfect the way we prescribe medication. And this idea that I've got an issue and somebody says I've got an issue and I have a pill, let me fix that. I think I went into psychiatry with the bigger questions in mind, like what is a life well lived? What is the meaning of people's lives? And so quickly, I was trained to just prescribe medication. If somebody couldn't sleep, here's a sleeping medication. If you're depressed, here's an antidepressant. If you're anxious, here's an anxiolytic. And I was blinded at the time to all of these other factors that contribute to how you're feeling. And so I think it's really important not to minimize the impact that some antidepressants and anxiolytics can have, but just to consider all of the factors that are contributing to what I'm seeing in front of me in my office.
Let's just make it nuts and bolts for a minute. I'm listening to this podcast right now, and I'm depressed. I know I'm depressed. What should I do?
Genuinely, that's when you need a professional. You do need to speak to somebody who is a board certified psychiatrist who can explain to you.
Not a psychologist, not a therapist.
A psychiatrist, because they're the ones who are going to be able to. I'm a huge fan of psychologists too, but a psychiatrist is going to be able to evaluate you in that moment. And you might see a psychologist who refers you to a psychiatrist, which is also possible, but a psychiatrist is going to be the one, if you need medication, who's going to be the one to prescribe it. But make sure you ask the questions about how long do you think I'm going to be on this medication for? Do you think it's going to be hard for me to taper off of this medication at the right time? How am I going to know it's that right time? And what are the side effects that I'm going to be feeling on this?
Okay, but before I go to a psychiatrist, I think I'm depressed. You can go online and take these depression quizzes and see, yep, well, the number adds up. I'm probably depressed. What should I do before I go see a psychiatrist to try to self-treat?
Self-treating can be probably.
I don't mean, getting a drug off the internet. I mean that are likely to lessen my depression.
Okay.
Or is there nothing? I go to psychiatrist.
I think certainly make that phone call. I've always been so interested. People often will have a psychiatrist's phone number that they will have gotten from a friend and it's in their pocket. And then kind of what is that moment that actually makes you pick up the phone and set up the appointment? And then sometimes people don't show up, but what's going on then? And I think keeping a journal of what's going on, because most of the time also there are these moments where we feel depressed, but are there points in the day where you're actually having a good time, where you feel good, where there's energy, where you're tapping into your strengths, that you're able to focus on your work or do something, or you're not thinking about that? Have that kind of journal that you'd be able to share with that psychiatrist when you do meet with them about kind of this is how, over the course of the day, these are my high points, these are my low points, this is when I'm feeling like I'm really sort of treading through molasses and I can't come up for air. When are those moments versus and then actually on Saturday I had a really good day. What did that day look like? I'm always really curious about any patient is tell me about a good day. Tell me about something good that happened this week.
Interesting.
When people are unable to do that, I'm really worried. And also something we've lost in therapy too is our sense of humor. That this old psychiatrist once said to me, that if your patient doesn't laugh at least 3 times in therapy, you're not doing any good.
You're not telling the right jokes.
But he wasn't being flippant. Obviously, there's certain things one's not able to make light of, and it's not to minimize anybody's suffering and depression.
Right.
But to also kind of find these pockets of lightness. And going back to this idea of Emo-Diversity, how can you have even this sadness and happiness exist side by side? Can you laugh through tears? Can you find those little moments where there is something kind of silly or amusing and that you can savor that? And so going back to this idea of what are you going to say, if you on a wait list to see a psychiatrist, look for a moment at those lifestyle factors. Are there any changes that you could be making in some of those blue zones domains around you're sleeping, because that's a huge thing we underestimate about how that affects your mental health. If you're not sleeping enough, if you're looking at your phone is by your bed at all times, how much are you spending on your screen? How much movement are you getting in each day? Just a little bit more movement in your day can make a huge difference. Spending some time in nature. And what are you putting in your body? I mean, we know just a serving of fruit and vegetables each day can actually shift how you feel. I mean,
Is
that's
that
this
right?
shift. And I think nutritional psychiatry is going to be very exciting.
Any
How
chance that beans will be a big breakthrough in
Oh,
psychiatry?
beans. I thought you're never going to bring that up. No, well, I think legumes and the beans you talk about. But yes, and they actually, what you eat affects how you feel. And I love this study that they had college students eat basically fast food, a diet of fast food for 3 days, essentially a long weekend. So it's like a weekend, you're misbehaving. And that how sluggish they felt, that they couldn't concentrate, they were irritable, so much so that even their partners noticed. So I think we really underestimate the power of what we're putting in our body and how it affects how we're feeling.
We've had on the podcast Corey Richards, who is one of National Geographic's hottest photographers, and we did a cover story on happiness together. And it turns out he was catastrophically depressed. He had some other mental issues going on, and he was very candid about uh, using psilocybin
Mhm.
and other psychoactive self-administered drugs to get better.
Mhm.
Where do you land on ayahuasca and ketamine and psilocybin as to before you go see a psychiatrist? Or
I wouldn't recommend it before you go see a psychiatrist. It is, I know of individual stories where it's been transformative and helped people with PTSD and untreatable depression and who've tried every medication, who even tried ECT. I mean, they've, been through it all and it's changed their lives. I've also seen the opposite and people who have it sort of unlocked a more like some psychosis in their brain and they felt worse because of it. And they haven't had even that integration piece of it where they're doing it with somebody who's sort of shepherding them through it. So I would recommend, this is wearing my psychiatry hat, see a psychiatrist first. And then I think you can make those decisions. And the jury's out with these studies. Every day, one comes out favoring them, another one comes out saying it's not helping that much. I just think right now it's one of the few things I learned to say in medical school was, I don't know. And I don't
that's so
know.
great. You're such a wonderful doctor. So, summing things up, when it comes to uh, getting more happiness or joy into your life, what would you say are the three most actionable tips people can take away from this conversation?
Do something for someone else. Invest in your relationships. One of the things I always say is like, it's a pet peeve of mine when people say, love you, put the I in there. Like, don't
Uh-huh.
forget the I.
I
Like,
love
I
that.
love you, own
Yeah.
it, you know? And stop thinking, start doing. It's really like the actions you take, the connections you make, and how you participate. That you're going to be marshmucking all your life. And that's a good thing. And your friends are
Love
your
it.
rocket ship, stay connected.
I just love that. You have every single uh, remedy and drug available to you. You have arguably more education on happiness than anybody else in the world, and you give them these very fundamentally human, accessible to everybody pieces of advice, and I just love that. And by the way, marketers can't sell you any of those; they're free.
Yeah, they are
All
free.
right, let's move on to, do therapists actually make us happier?
It's a great question. And the answer is no. And actually, don't you see now on social media, like people use that like in
Therapists
therapy?
don't make us happier. I want to make that point.
It's if you are in therapy and you are talking about the same thing over and over again, and you're just fixating on what's wrong and you're complaining about the past and you're not thinking about the future, if you're just thinking about what's going on in your head and you're not talking about like the actions you can take to move forward, and if you're just focused on like sort of your interior life and not your connections and your relationships, that's probably not the best therapy to be in. And I just like this idea that, oh, therapy is the answer, I think is misguided. It's like how you're living is the answer to a lot of these questions. And these are, these choices that you're making in an everyday way. And there's a a question people want us to ask all the time is, how are you? And then you're not supposed to say, how are you anymore? You're supposed to say, how are you really? Because the assumption is when you say, how are you? The answer is like, oh, fine. And that you're not really getting to the crux of it because the assumption is you're miserable. And if you're not acknowledging that you're miserable, then you're either in denial or there's something wrong with you. And I think just we're assuming pathology where maybe there isn't any there. And we're creating this expectation effect that if we're assuming everyone's miserable, that, and that everyone's vulnerable, that everyone's broken, that we're tiptoeing around them and we're sort of walking on eggshells and forgetting about their capacity and their potential to go off and do great things, not just for themselves, but for others. And we're inviting all of this self-focus rather than having what I call like an other orientation, an outer orientation.
So what do you say? First of all, what do you say to me instead of how are you, or do you say how are you? And what's the best answer? What when somebody says how are you to Samantha, who's a friend, what do you say back?
Well, it's become almost like formulaic, and sometimes it's just to like grease the wheels of a conversation. Like, how are you? I'm fine. Like, and if maybe to me you wouldn't want to like dive into what's really going on with your life, but I don't know. Maybe with your somebody you see every day, or with John, you would talk about what's going on. That I don't need to pry out of you. All the misery. And I think this mining for misery is happening.
Mining for misery.
And it's becoming like our common ground. And the only way you can bond with someone is by sharing or even oversharing. And this kind of
vulnerability.
Yes. And that is why can we only bond with people when we're just talking about ourselves at our worst?
Yeah.
Can't we also not in a bragging or humble bragging way, but also consider what we are like at our best. What were the strengths we used in those moments? How can we use them going forward to serve others and to sort of, add value to the world?
I know this may sound fast out, but the best response to how are you comes from my brother, Nick, my little brother.
What does he say?
When you ask him how he is, he says, it's the best day of my life. And you know what? When he says that, I feel better. Yeah. And I know it's just kind of a rote answer, but it's so much better than, I have a bowel obstruction or.
Yes, no. And that people almost feel guilty. I knew this woman whose daughter was in college and that they would in these dorm meetings talk about that. And the kid felt guilty not having something to complain about. That she felt that if she couldn't talk about something terrible, that she was sort of maybe in denial about it or ignoring all the suffering in the world and not being able to look for the good and to see this is the best day of my life. I'm here. I'm alive.
Well, Samantha, today has been the best day of my life talking to you. And I actually mean it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everyday Vitality, if you haven't gotten, if you can't go see Samantha Boardman as a patient, get the book, subscribe to Positive Prescription, get the paid version. And thank you so much for spreading your wisdom. And it's not only, I know you personally, you live a rich, wonderful life. You're good to your friends. You have a wonderful family. And you also have the education to give us advice that is underpinned by real research. And it is just a treasure chest. Thank you. And you've made me happier.
Thank you for making all of us happier. Thank you, Dan.